And again, I'm going to try to keep the session to about an hour. We're going to keep it to an hour so that you leave wanting more and come back next month. So let's look lively. Again, my goal here is not to impart any content per se. It's to facilitate a lively dynamic and the playful exploration of ideas. And I'm particularly interested in the kind of ideas that no one of us can get at by themselves, but that this particular group is uniquely capable of getting at by sharing our thoughts and our observations. Now I'm going to be using the, asking you to raise the little blue hand in the participation window if you want to participate. Can everybody find that little blue hand and give it a try? So when I see that blue hand, that's my indication that that you want to speak. We have a good group, good sized group today. So we're going to all have, I'm seeing Francesco's, Patricia, Paula's, Chris's.
I'm going to lower mine now.
Thank you.
And did you just receive my note on the breakout rooms?
No, could you just share it verbally, please?
Yeah, I think we'll just have to do without them this session.
Okay. You'll forgive us, if you will, while we still work out the technical glitches on the breakout rooms thing. I think this is a good size for a single unified group. So I think we'll be fine. So again, it's not just me who should be sort of keeping tabs on the blue hands in the participants window. If you have the floor and you noticed other blue hands going up, that means it's time to wrap up because other people are feeling a need to speak, okay? So be brief, be interesting, don't bother being right, just be interesting, all right? Okay, so our topic today is self-domestication. When I told my wife this morning that I was facilitating a conversation about self-domestication, she says, ha, what do you know about self-domestication? She said, it took me to domesticate you. So, so I'm not claiming to be an expert here. In fact, I've only begun to learn about the phenomenon biologists call self-domestication in the last few months. So I'm here to learn more than I am to educate. I'll say a few things at the outset to kind of brief anybody who hasn't had a chance to dabble with the concept before. Hopefully that'll get the ball rolling, but as soon as possible, I want this to become interactive. So Darwin noticed over a century and a half ago that domesticated animals seem to have similar characteristics. And he said in these similarities, he saw these same similarities popping up in domesticated animal after domesticated animal. And nowadays biologists actually call this domestication syndrome and regard some of these traits as sort of a signature that the species was domesticated in some fashion. Some of these features are being less reactive, less reactive and aggressive than your wild counterparts. More playful. Domesticated animals tend to be smaller than their wild counterparts. They tend to have smaller brains. They often exhibit sort of juvenile traits, and there's often a case where the males of the species start to more closely resemble the females. So the technical term for that, I believe, is less sexual dimorphism. The males and females start to be more alike. When wolves became dogs, their faces got flatter, their ears got floppy, some of their tails got curly, their teeth smaller, and we see some of these same signatures in other animals that have been domesticated. Now, just recently, biologists have started to notice that human beings seem to have some of these signature traits, which raises the obvious question, have human beings been domesticated? And if so, by who or by whom? So who domesticated us, if they did, and why? To what end? And did we by chance domesticate ourselves? And if so, how does that work? So people are just starting to get their heads around these questions, and there's some really intriguing hypotheses kind of being argued in the biology literature. But I don't think anybody fully understands this concept yet, or its full implications. So that's why we're here to explore. So some of the questions I'd like to invite you to hazard an opinion on, or even to just hazard a question on, are: what on earth is self-domestication? How exactly do we define domestication? How does domestication work? If we are self-domesticated, how exactly did we manage that? And if it's true that we turns out to be a self-domesticated species, what does that mean for how we should treat one another, and how we can live better? All right, so all of that is on the table, and I very have a whole bunch of other questions, but I'm going to hang on to them for now because I am eager to hear what you all think. Let's start off with short, sweet contributions to establish a good back and forth dynamic, and we can save the more long-winded digressions for a little later in the session. Please throw up a hand there when you're ready. Francesco.
Yes, I'm glad to hear that you're not the only one that is having problems understanding the concept. But I have one issue that created a lot of problems in my mind to try to figure out. Mm-hmm. Because the word self-domestication involves an intent. And evolution is a natural consequences. So I couldn't see how a biologist can come to the term of self-domestication with this contradiction, at least apparent.
Very good. Yeah, insofar, very nice question, Francesco. Yeah, insofar as we tend to think of domestication as an intentional process conducted by an intelligent species on another species. What happens if there's no such intent? And can we speak meaningfully of domestication if it happens without anyone's without intelligent design, so to speak? Jeremy.
Well, I think that's, a really interesting point that Francesco's brought up, but I think it actually reflects where evolutionary biology no longer is, because it's a kind of selfish gene world where there's no teleology. But in fact, we now know, of course, that animals, and not just humans, create their own niches. And in that sense, we could say that we as a social species, through self-domestication, are creating a kind of social niche which works. And Darwin, I think, actually was kind of ahead of us in this. Darwin argued that group belongingness was probably associated with greater survival. And therefore, we can think that species such as our own that have, well, maybe we may be the only self-domesticating species, but insofar as we create a culture in which cooperation, altruism, diminished intra-species aggression exist, then we can say that we've created that niche for ourselves. I mean, the example that Richard Wrangham, the example that Richard Wrangham gives in his account of self-domestication, which I rather love, is he says, imagine, of course we can't in these COVID days, but imagine an aeroplane, a fully laden jumbo jet with 400 passengers aboard. And we sit there for 5-10 hours and tolerate one another. Now, replace us with any other species, including our close relatives, chimpanzees or orangutans, other higher apes, that have not been so self-domesticated, then we end up with, we see the difference. Now, the extraordinary difference between humans and other animals is that we are self-domesticated. We don't attack each other on subways or on airplanes.
Yes.
And yet, of course, in this involuntary way, but in our planning and in our voluntary way, of course, we are far more aggressive than we are with our fellow primates. Sorry, I know I'm only supposed to speak briefly, but
that's very, very nice, Jeremy. That's right. And in one of the things animal breeders select for is docility. And insofar as human beings treat each other with docility or tolerance, that is arguably a sign that we have been domesticated, presumably by ourselves or by each other. Steve, jump in here, please.
Just back to the issue of whether we're the only species to have done this, isn't it now thought that dogs self-domesticated?
Very nice. I believe that's correct. And let me spell out what little I understand on that score. So when evolutionary biologists try to imagine wolves becoming dogs, they think that there was probably a transition stage. It wasn't like a single leap where, you know, a cave-dwelling ancestor captured a wolf and tamed it, nothing like that. What probably happened was that wolves started skulking around the perimeter of tribal living grounds, basically trying to take advantage of the trash and the discards of the human tribe. And the ones that were sort of least frightened and least aggressive managed to come gradually closer and kind of get incorporated into the ecosystem created by these humans, with humans actually deliberately breeding dogs only much later. So Steve's right. It's now thought that tamer wolves or friendlier wolves self-domesticated or partially self-domesticated themselves before human intentionality or intentional design kicked in. Cormac.
Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
It's kind of a development of Jeremy's thought experiment about the airplane. And it's the point at which self-domestication or human domestication kicked in. And, you know, if you go back in steps, if you fill that airplane with Romans, what would happen? And then maybe you go back 10,000 years and you say, okay, if you filled it with Homo sapiens, but at the verge of, well, they're still pastoral and they haven't moved to any sort of a state economy, you know, before the kingdom of Uruk 5,000 years ago, say 7,000 years ago, what would they be like in the plane? Or go back maybe to 50,000 years to the cognitive revolution, and where it doesn't look like there's much genetic change in humans, but suddenly there's this explosion of complex art and the emergence of religion. Are they domesticated? Or do you have to go back 500,000 years to the invention of fire? What's the point at which you believe this happened? I don't know. Is there any evidence?
Beautiful question. I love it. Vivek? Do we have a Vivek?
It's just a coincidence. Just one there was a lecture by Brian Harry about survival of the friendliest, his book titled Survival of the Friendliest. There he gives an example of self-domestication by bonobos. When compared to chimpanzees, bonobos have self-domesticated themselves by creating egalitarian leadership, or these examples give an answer for me, at least.
Yeah.
It's not only humans, even bonobos. Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that bonobos are markedly less aggressive towards one another.
Yeah.
Chimpanzees are, suggests that there was some powerful selection process going on just since those two species diverged. And you compare humans to chimpanzees and bonobos, we seem to be somewhere in the middle, less aggressive than chimps, but more aggressive than bonobos. So it seems likely that some process helped to induce higher levels of docility and cooperativeness in both us and bonobos.
In a way, self-domestication is not an innovation by humans. It's they are just moderating the natural selection process. That's it. It's not created by humans or any species for that matter. It's just they're just moderating what is there in nature. They are increasing the abundance of the traits which they like, the friendliest traits. Yeah.
Vivek's observation creates a wonderful challenge, philosophical challenge to the concept, or to question about the boundaries of the concept, right? So if bonobos can self-domesticate, then you don't need human intelligence for domestication to happen. If wolves can self-domesticate, you don't need human intelligence to do it. And I believe so here's the official Wikipedia definition of domestication, which is worth thinking about here. One species A domesticates a second species B if the first species, A, the domesticator, influences the reproduction and care of the second species, species B, the domesticated, in order to extract resources from B. So if you care for and breed another species in order to use them, that would be a very clear and sort of paradigm case of domestication. But what happens when two species just kind of like start to collaborate? Each of them starts using and benefiting from their collaboration with the other. So who in that case is domesticating who? Did flowers domesticate honeybees? They certainly use them, right? They use honeybees' capacity to spread their pollen to reproduce. But nobody thinks that a tulip has a mind or is doing it on a basis of intelligence. And yet we're talking about a phenomenon here that's not that different from human and dogs learning to collaborate. I'm seeing a hand. I can't see your name, but ma'am, can you?
Hi.
Alessandra.
My name is Alessandra. I'm an experimental economist, and I see that David Hurst asked, did women domesticate men? I'm also working on female strategies and things like that. And my answer, and I'm really puzzled by one question about the self-domestication. Mate choice, so sexual selection and mate choice. And I wish the data could say that women go for the nicest guys. The data don't say that, unfortunately. So if there is this domestication, it didn't happen only through sexual selection by female mate choice. There is lots of evidence that women go, well, there is the dual mating strategies, and especially at the peak of fertility and cycle, women see, I don't know, because we need to replicate and get a lot more data. They seem to find the bad guys absolutely irresistible for passing down the genes to the next generation. Although for long-term relationship, it is the nice guys, the one that win. But for self-domestication, if it happens through genetic evolution, or at least a contribution of genetic evolution is the bad. People on death row in San Quentin in San Francisco receive hundreds of love letters every day even from perfect women strangers that throw themselves at them. They are on Tinder, they get lots of dates till they get women to support their parole case, and they get conjugal visit, and children do happen. So it's probably a question of number and proportion. How many women really go for the bad gene, for the strong genes versus the nice guy? It's not me, don't look at me as if I'm one.
Hey, that's a wonderful observation, Alessandra. I really like that. There's so much to think about there. One reason Alessandra's mention of mate choice is especially important and relevant here is that if you ask about how does self-domestication happen exactly? Like what exactly happens to individuals to make self-domestication happen? An obvious hypothesis is that females choose nicer guys, thereby making the species more docile. So that's certainly one of the hypotheses to look at first, but Alessandra raises some really interesting challenges to the idea that that's the central mechanism behind self-domestication. Yeah, beautiful. I'm seeing that Steve has his hand up again. Is that right? Francesco, I think your hand's been up the whole time, so I don't know.
Yeah, no, but I have it new again, but that's okay.
Okay, so let's hear from Steve. Jeremy, I see your hand coming back.
So I'm a retired psychologist who just has a dilettante's interest in all of this. So maybe my question is naive, but forgive me if it is. What I'm struggling to understand is, what does the concept of self-domestication add to what we already know about natural selection and selection pressures, etc.? I don't see what there is that's new in it. It just seems like a new word for old Darwinian concepts of natural selection. Maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, you know, I mean, Alessandra's point suggests that it might be quite similar, at least, to mate selection or sexual selection. I think it was Jeremy before who, or maybe it was Francesco, who said, look, human beings create culture, and then culture exerts selective force on human beings. There's a biology and culture co-evolution thing going on there that is not exactly self-referential, but it's a closed loop whereby you could understand why somebody might want to call it self-domestication. But again, Steve's point is very much to the point here. If we already knew that human biology affects human culture and that human culture affects human biology, we already know there's a closed loop there. What exactly does the concept of self-domestication add? Lovely question. Jeremy. Oh, I'm sorry. I think Francesco's been waiting then, Jeremy.
Well, you know, I mean, I'm glad that Steve came before me, and he's a psychologist, and so am I. And we're thinking along the same line. And what is new about this? It's all about contingencies and consequences. You know, and so what does the term, that's what that's what the take that I had after reading all of this. I said, what does the term accomplish? And how confusing it is, because it's sort of, in my own mind, self involves I am doing it.
Beautiful. Jeremy, you want to build on
Well,
that?
I think we're moving in a way, let's accept the concept, and maybe the concept in itself isn't saying anything terribly exciting, but then we're moving on to mechanism. Let's say if we accept that self-domestication is a phenomenon, is a fact even, then we have to say, well, what are the mechanisms behind this? And Alexandra has raised this. And of course, there are two, I would say there are two sort of interesting debating points here. One is Alexandra mentioned death row. So what's happening on death row? Well, these are people who are facing capital punishment. So you could say that in patriarchal societies, where the men actually make the decisions, the men are actually reducing the number of, inverted commas, bad guys for the women to fall in love with and have babies by. So the men are saying, if you want to have collaborative and cooperative societies, and on the whole, if you accept the group selection hypothesis, then you're saying collaborative and cooperative groups outperform groups that are dominated by, inverted commas, bad guys. So I think we're moving in the direction of what the mechanisms might be. And again, if you read Richard Wrangham, he actually is in a rather difficult cleft stick, because on the one hand, he says the evidence suggests, if you look at pre-industrial societies, and certainly if you look at hunter-gatherer societies, then capital punishment is a phenomenon, it's a fact. If someone is, inverted commas, a bad guy, he's usually killed by a member of his own family, which stops feuding. It's usually one of his brothers that does it. So we're moving in the direction of how does self-domestication happen?
Good.
And partly it reduces the reproductive success of highly dominant inverted commas, psychopathic individuals.
Very
And the
nice.
other mechanism is group selection. Sorry, again, I'm talking too much, but there we are.
Good.
Very nice, Jeremy. I want to give Ron a shot here. Ron, you want to jump in?
We teach in a business school, and we're trying to attack the MBA economic mindset of only me, the individualism, and all the rest. And we're looking to this kind of scientific data, and we use the big history and journey of the universe kinds of ideas for our students, and because we want them to be able to develop plans to bring people together in a more holistic economic model. Reading the Wrangham article was very helpful to me, because it says, look, the basis of this is that even someone who's not an alpha male can tell a good story. And so we tell them the same thing, that if you're on Wall Street and you're trying to fight against the kill what you eat mentality of firms and all the rest, we look for evidence that this is the way, and the piece that we take from it is the ability for language and narrative. And so I don't know how you all feel about that as scientists, but we sure push that a lot in our area. We use Yuval Harari's thing on Homo sapiens, and this whole idea of being able to tell a story to larger groups of people. So I'm curious, you scientist types, are we on safe ground here? And we've been talking to David about this, is that we want to bring these ideas into, of all things, business schools and classes in economics.
I'm gonna take a stab at that. I think it's a wonderfully worthwhile thing to do, Ron. Understanding the importance of collaboration and mutualism in the history of our species can really change the framework you bring to business, and change the way you conduct yourself in a world that is thought to be, is often characterized even by economists as sort of the selfish striving of utility maximizers. Right? I want to recommend to you the same book I recommended and that we discussed on this at this forum a month ago. It's a new book by Rutger Bregman called Humankind, A Hopeful History. And you can't ask for a better antidote to the MBA mindset. I recommend it to you highly.
I think he's terrific. I follow him. I'm a member of his correspondent paper and all the rest. No, thank you very much, Andrew.
Sure, thank you. Okay, let's see, who's been waiting the longest here? Maybe Vedant?
Yeah, so I just want to ask, what would be the effect of evolution of teaching in human system and its effect on the self-domestication?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that please a little louder?
What would be the effect of evolution of teaching in humans and its effect, its, I don't know, mutual evolution or its consequence as a self-domestication or a better efficient way to domesticate at group level?
I think I must apologize because I think my Zoom glitched in a way that caused me to miss a word or two, Vedant. I apologize. May I ask you to repeat again with my apologies.
So, okay, can you hear me properly now?
That helps if you speak up.
Yeah, so my question was, what would be the, what is the effect or consequence of evolution of teaching in human system?
Of teaching with T?
Yeah. And it's either co-evolution, you can say, or I don't know, as a way to self-domesticate at social level. So you can, its consequence can be, there could be division of labor also, and I don't know, many other consequences can also be possible.
A lovely question, and I can only begin to gesture at an answer. This very Rutger Bregman that I just mentioned to Ron conjectures that what set Homo sapiens apart from our, say, Neanderthal cousins was our greater facility for social learning. So if you have two brainy primates competing, and one of them is much more adept at learning what other people think, you can expect to gain some huge advantages in the form of greater collaboration. not only can you collaborate better, but you can learn fly fishing from Zog, and you can learn how to spear a mammoth from Glog, and you can learn how to, climb a berry tree from Drog, right? And if you combine all of those things, you have many more survival resources. So it's quite possible, and this is a hypothesis I think well worth exploring, that our greater facility for learning and sharing information may have been kind of the secret ingredient that propelled our species to mastery. So it would be wonderful, I think, for somebody to look at the teaching side of the teaching learning equation and try to figure out the role of teaching in evolution. Great question. Cormac, would you like to jump back in?
I'm kind of just still stuck on this. Where's the value in the term apart from just regular evolution? And I'm kind of reluctant to bring it up, but slavery is 5,000 years old. That is a old human institution where people captured other people and used them for their own purposes and manipulated them for their own purposes. Not dissimilar to animal domestication. And it is not evolutionarily, it is a different process to traditional evolution. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Or, that, because it is a different mechanism. And it obviously has had a big impact on us since, for the last 5,000 years. It's only 250 years that we haven't had that as a predominant institution.
Well, Cormac's certainly right to raise the question. The technical definition of domestication comes awfully close to encapsulating or including the institution of slavery. So great question. Steve? And Vivek, I see you. Steve, are you still?
No, my hand should be down. Sorry.
Okay, Vivek.
Yeah. I understand the question by Cormac, what is the significance of the word self-domestication? But what I understand is probably this is a revelation which is brought in by evolutionary researchers, that humans were not the only agency who had been domesticating other species. They themselves domesticated. So this word self-domestication applies only at the scale of species level, not at the scale of individuals, not at the scale of any cultural group or social group or anything like that. The act of domestication is done by culture or whichever social institution. It could be religion, language, literary text, whichever it could be. The instrument could be anything, but this self-domestication applies only at the scale of species level. Under that, at individual level, at a group level, it doesn't apply. There is no self-domestication. Groups are not self-domesticating themselves. Individuals are not self-domesticating themselves. The institutional setup which was created through their process, that environment is creating the domestication process.
I hear you, Vivek. Thank you. That's, I think, an important observation. Velikovsky, will you jump in?
Thanks, Andy. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. I just wanted to come back to, I think it was Francisco and Steve, maybe Cormac was asking that great question, which we have covered a little, what's new and what does this add, the self-domestication theory. Here's my understanding, and everyone can tell me if I'm wrong. I know of 4 different types of selection. So natural, from reading Darwin and others, natural selection, sexual selection, artificial selection, which is domesticating our farm animals and crops, and unconscious selection. First of all, have I got that right? Am I missing any? Are there more than 4?
I think that's a pretty good starter set. Perhaps this whole self-domestication process is a suggestion that that group needs to be expanded. I don't know. Proceed though. I think that's a good start.
So my understanding, which could be very wrong, is self-domestication theory is a subset of artificial selection. So when we think of how wolves were attracted to our garbage heaps, but once the wolves were tame and not afraid and not reactively aggressive and trying to bite or eat us, we then took the reins and did artificial selection and tamed that dog further and bred like Balyev's fox kittens, the Russian experiments in the 20s and 30s. If you keep breeding the tamest and friendliest, you'll end up with a very good human companion that cooperates and is an ally as opposed to a predator. So I see, just in terms of what's new, and for me what's exciting about this is the idea that we have self-domesticated ourselves even further. For one thing, maybe over deep time, a lot of reactively aggressive personality types may have ended up in, say, the military or the defense kind of departments and ended up getting deselected or dead or injured, basically sort of taken out of the population pool to some extent. And so then for me, the question with artificial selection and further self-domestication is when I read Wrangham and look at Wrangham's talks about this, how bonobos tend to be much more pro-social, less reactively aggressive, more friendly, and chimps tend to be quite aggressive. The thought occurs, as humans, if there's any way to direct or shape human nature in the future, we may want to steer closer to bonobos and away from the more aggressive and reactive characteristics of the chimps. And then that raises a further question of what E.O. Wilson calls directed biocultural evolution, which is what I think we're also talking about with that closed loop of the culture and the biology, and including teaching, which we talked about. What are the avenues we could steer human nature en masse down to even further self-domesticate, make ourselves more friendly, more cooperative? And that raises questions of, sorry, I should stop talking.
Well, just, I love what you're saying, Velikovsky. This is great stuff. Why don't you wrap up with that next question and we'll give somebody else a shot. But this is great.
It just makes me think of, like Harari talks about reading science fiction as maybe some good prescriptions for the future. I'm not recommending this one, but he talks about Brave New World and everybody is on the drug Soma, which makes them very happy and they don't want to fight anybody and everybody gets along. I know a lot of people are, we're already a well-prescribed culture and the human race has a lot of psychological drugs we take to alter our mood and behavior. Maybe not so much that, but maybe thinking more along biological engineering and the things that Harari raises ethical questions about is how should we steer human nature in the future, maybe?
Beautiful. A fantastic job of making connections there. Thank you, Velikovsky. Andy Lord?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about feralness as opposed to domestication. I lived close to a river and a little feral cat started appearing, trying to get to the rodents. And of course, like the cats, I started giving it bits of food, bits of milk. And you couldn't get anywhere near it. It just ripped your hand off if you tried to stroke it. It seems as though a lot of that, it's now domesticated. One of the neighbours has really looked after it. It's even got a cat flap into the house now. So it seems as though a lot of it is that behavioural, that social bit, where it's learned to trust socially the people around it now. I'm just thinking, going back to the benefits of self-domestication is the implications for human cultural evolution, socialization, as opposed to being feral.
Well, wonderful question. It does seem to me that, at least on the surface, feralization is kind of the inverse of domestication. Very nice. Alan, and Chris, I do see you. I'm coming to you soon, all right? Alan. I think you're muted, Alan. If you could unmute yourself. So I'll tell you what, Chris, you jump in here. Alan, I'm going to ask you to come back after you've found the unmute button. Chris Janord?
Hi, yeah. Richard Wrangham's already been mentioned. I think it's pretty useful at this point to just point out that he talks about two different forms of aggression. One, the reactive aggression, which are kind of where we've been compared with the chimpanzees and bonobos. But then also this other sort of aggression, which is much, I think he uses a term for it, but I can't remember the term, but the coldness, if you like, of hunting, where when any creature hunts, it doesn't show expression of anger. Hunting is just done with this very controlled method, and that human beings rank fairly highly on that. Certainly some individuals more than others, but as a species we plot. And this idea of us simply having this idea of domesticated creatures being non-aggressive perhaps it's not as simple as that.
Yeah, very nice observation. Very good. Yeah, so there are multiple kinds of aggression and human beings. Alan, you're with us. You're back. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I keep coming back in my own thoughts to how very important it is that we've developed a theory of mind, that we can not just communicate with one another, but we cannot avoid knowing what the other person is beginning to think about us. And well, that comes in on top of forming herds, which is so sort of passively a benefit, but the ability to learn from one another and to, well, just take, when we started using fire, that meant that we sat around and we talked. And some of the New Guinea tribes spend hours and hours talking through things. This ability to produce a universe which is shared between us, I think is extremely important here.
Beautiful, Alan. I think you're absolutely right. I think Jonathan Haidt has a version of this hypothesis in his book, The Righteous Mind. He talks about our ancestors having been able to sort of weave together, using language and to weave together, I think he calls them moral matrices, kind of just shared understandings of right and wrong.
Yes, yes.
And if you want to collaborate in large numbers, that seems to be absolutely critical.
And of course, we started collaborating in large numbers in different ways. For example, Göbekli Tepe, which was constructed about 12,000 years ago, it was just a meeting place. Stonehenge was just a meeting place. Well, that's very well along the process of domestication, but it's a fairly sophisticated idea that people who are going to meet occasionally, nevertheless, want to meet.
It does suggest that we're not just highly social, but almost pantingly eager to share the contents of our minds with one another. Right?
Indeed, yeah, we like sharing.
Right, and information in particular, right?
Yes, yes. yes.
And
one thing that occurred to me several years ago when I joined a group called the Sea of Faith was the importance of stories, because stories are not just a statement about something, they are something that grows, that you can influence, that you feel that you belong to. All of this sort of stuff coming out of the ability to communicate, both psychologically and also verbally.
Very nice, Alan. Hey, listen, guys, I don't know how many of you guys know this, but there's a fun way to participate even when you don't have the floor here. Down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a little button on the right called Reactions, and you can give somebody a thumbs up for what they're saying, or a kind of a quiet round of applause. I love the idea of using buttons like these to kind of show enthusiasm for the points others are making. And if we're interested in building a community that can leverage the way ideas feed off of each other, using these extra channels to express enthusiasm for each other's ideas is actually can make a huge difference. So I know it can be hard to wait patiently, wait 10, 15 minutes for your turn with the floor, but use that reactions button as another way to kind of add your 2 cents. And I think we'll grow more fully and more quickly as a community. Francesco, did you?
Sure. 2 things. One of them is run, keep doing what you're doing, because certainly Wall Street needs to be domesticated. And I think you're on the right track. Andy, you raised a very important point, which made me think about a lot of this. And one of them is that when the whole process of evolution led to learning, that was a critical point, you know, because we had reflexive behavior, okay? But operant behavior occurred, which is the one that is involved in the process of, you know, most of the learning that we acquire as humans, was a significant point, which may have triggered the cultural evolution along with the ability to develop cognitive skills as well as language.
Nice.
So it leads me to the idea that maybe domestication is nothing more than a product of the coevolution process of now culture, and may have been the first manifestation of the cultural evolution being seen itself in behavioral terms, and the morphological evolution, the biological evolution, working together to facilitate the process of self-domestication. I'm not entirely sure, and I don't know much about this. But
that's a really interesting suggestion, and I thank you for sharing it. It makes a lot of sense to me. Couple things, guys. I'm going to share one thought, and then I want to make sure we vote together on a topic for next month. So stick around for that so you can help choose our topic for next month. I wanted to add one more thought to this process. In principle, a domesticating or domesticator species can select for any qualities that they find useful or in another species. So you can breed an animal to do almost anything, I mean, for all kinds of things. It just happens that human beings have, for the most part, preferred to work with animals that are more docile and obedient. And so selection for docility or friendliness or something like, or some combination of those 2 things seems to be at the heart of the domestication process. And it just so happens that human beings are a pretty darn cooperative species. But maybe there's a dark side to self-domestication. Maybe self-domestication didn't just take away our more aggressive instincts. Maybe it also made us too docile for our own good. Think about how often people succumb to groupthink. Think about how often people don't think for themselves. If you took a look at the Wrangham article that I linked to for this, he actually talks about the role in which conspiracy, being able to conspire together to take down an aggressive male, was quite probably one of the key mechanisms behind self-domestication. If that's true, then one of the vestiges of that past might be a proneness to conspiracy thinking. Right?
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of interesting cognitive biases that start to make an interesting kind of sense when you look at human evolution through the lens of self-domestication. I think there's a lot to be, I think there's still a lot of mileage to be gained from the idea, even if the idea is rough around the edges. and still very much a contested concept. But that's what makes these things interesting, right? So hey, look, I encourage you to continue exploring these ideas and to also get to know one another and continue fruitful conversations in between our meetings. But let's take a minute now to vote on a topic for next month so that I can keep my promise of wrapping up.
Do you have a date for next month?
Yeah, Sage, do you have the date?
It's still TBD.
If it's the second Wednesday of November, what would that be?
Would be the 11th.
So I'll tell you what, either the 11th or the 18th, but you'll hear from us through TVOL, okay? We hope you'll all join us again. I thought this was a fabulous discussion, and I loved the thoughtfulness and the way people built on each other's observations, and I think we got something really good going here, so I hope you'll keep coming back. Okay, for next time, here's some sexy topics. I'm gonna run through them all, and then we're gonna vote on each one. It's approval voting, which means you can vote for as many as you like, but if you vote for all of them, you essentially cancel yourself out. So you might wanna vote for less than all of them, even though they're all great topics. Okay, so topic number 1, humanity's Rubicon crossing. More and more evolutionary biologists have been using the metaphor of Julius Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon as a sort of a fateful step that sent the Roman Republic down the path towards an empire. And the question, the evolutionary question, the biological question is, or what was the key trait that sent humanity down its very distinctive and unusual evolutionary path? What were some of the earliest adaptations that sort of snowballed into the highly distinctive animal that we call humanity? So there's lots of interesting hypotheses out there. I'm not going to enumerate them now, but if you like, we can discuss the different conjectures out there about the fateful crossing of the Rubicon in our human evolutionary past. That's topic number 1. Topic number 2 is the biology of status. And I'll give you a chance to vote here in a second. And was that a question, Alessandra, or was that just an expression of interest? Okay, gotcha. And finally, a third topic is dehumanization. What can a modern understanding of our biology teach us about the process of dehumanization and how we can prevent it? Okay, so those are my 3 candidates. What I'm gonna do here is ask you to vote using the blue hand in the participants window. And Sage, I'll ask you to keep a tally, if you can count them up. And we'll go with the highest vote getter. Okay, everybody please put your blue hand down to start with. Cormac, thank you. Okay, all those in favor of discussing humanity's Rubicon crossing, please put up a blue hand. Okay, I'm seeing at least 11, very nice. Okay, thank you, please put your hands down. All those in favor of discussing the biology of status. Oh, another good one. Okay, very nice. I'm counting at least 10 there. Thank you, guys. Hands down. And finally, dehumanization. Wow, I think we have a winner. All right. We're going to take a look at one of the darker aspects of human nature next time and try to make sense of it through the lens of biology, philosophy, and any other discipline you happen to bring to bear. So thank you all for joining us. Sage, is there anything else people need to know?
No, I'll just keep an eye out for a follow-up email with the next link, and I will also share a link for you to invite your friends if anybody else who would be excited to join these conversations.
Wonderful. And one last thought, guys, before I turn you loose. I've been trying to facilitate, I've been sort of practicing the art of facilitating collaborative reasoning and collaborative learning for a long time. And this is easily one of my favorite sessions. I think this was marvelous. You guys really bought into what I was trying to do, and I really appreciate it. I had a blast. I saw all kinds of interesting ideas around. I hope you also enjoyed it, that you'll rejoin us next week and help me continue to cultivate this kind of dynamic that can be so special when everybody buys in. Thanks, everybody. Remember to vote before we meet next, and talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.